was very kind of you. So thank you all very, very much. When I was in high school, sophomore in high school, I went to a religious conference, and it was a great 4-day kind of conference. And when I got back, my dad said, "How was it?" I said, "Dad, it was great. We did all these wonderful things. I met all these great people, and Andrew Young was the speaker. He was amazing." If you don't know who's on the screen, that's Andrew Young. And so my dad said, "Oh, well, what did Andrew Young say?" And I said, "You know, Dad, I don't remember, but it was really energizing. I felt really great about it, and it was fantastic." And so my dad said, "You would have been better off if you bought a book." So this is a book that has been very influential in my life, and I think relevant to the topic. Now, Laura mentioned that I tweet a lot, but one thing that I tweet a lot is about F1, and I love Formula One racing. So Formula One is going to be the analogy for this talk. I found myself in a race when I just got out of law school. I joined a firm, Strauss & Troy, and at this race, I felt like, quite frankly, I was at the back of the line. I was in a class with 2 other guys, one of whom was very well connected inside Cincinnati's social and business scene, and the other was a gentleman who was working in an area of the law where they would have tons of hours at all times of day. He was doing securities law when that was a sexy, hot area of the law. And so I kind of felt like I was the car in the very rear that's blowing smoke, and those guys were the Ferraris up in front. And so I had to develop a strategy for competing with these 2 people and also competing inside of the firm. So I knew that I was behind financially, meaning that I would not have the financial connections in order to get business like they would. I felt intellectually I was on par with them. I knew that I had to catch up quickly. I lacked connections, and so I had to develop a strategy to compete. So I felt a little bit out of place. So I love Mercedes, and so I felt like a Mercedes. These were all very nice cars behind it, but they're not F1 Mercedes. And so I had to have kind of a checkup or get my act together. So I came up with a 6D strategy, and that strategy was basically do something 6 nights a week. So it could be play flag football, it could be go out drinking with friends, it could be serving on a CBA board committee, the Young Lawyers Committee, which I served on and was very impactful for me. And it was just do something 6 nights a week, 1 night a week, I would take off. Then I promised myself I would develop sincere relationships. So everybody that I met, I would try and develop a connection with them on some level, and then hopefully that would blossom. I wanted to meet a diverse group of people. So practicing law, typically we only run into people who have graduated from college, are very driven, type A people. But I wanted to meet a diverse group of people, people who maybe did not come from the same socioeconomic background, didn't have the same education, were from different parts of city or county or the world. And then I wanted to deduce the complexity of people, meaning I wanted to know key facts about people in developing a relationship. So it wasn't one of those things where you hand a business card, you call them 2 minutes later and you say, "Hey, do you need a lawyer?" Right? It's not that type of thing, but it's developing something that's meaningful and understanding that people are very complex. I always kept data, meaning I would, if you looked at my, there weren't phones in those days necessarily, but if you looked at my kind of database, you would see I would have someone's name, I'd have where I met them, I'd have some of their interests maybe, what they liked to do, and maybe some things that I could include them in if it were a CBA event or something like that, Young Lawyers. And I always tried to make sure that I deliberately cared about the relationship or what I was trying to do. So the relationships always had to be mutually beneficial. These are F1 driver teams, and there are 2 drivers on each team. The drivers hate each other, but they have to pretend like they love each other because their strategy depends on it. So winning depends on liking your teammate, but you're still always trying to beat your teammate. So in this, I put this up because the relationship between me and a particular individual had to be mutually beneficial in that I had to provide them with something and they had to be interesting or appealing on some level like that. And then this is the steering wheel for an F1 car, and it's very complex, right? There are over 23 little buttons or things that you have to do. And so I was trying to get to that level of detail in terms of the relationships that I would try and build. And so what I noticed is linking people was always something that people enjoyed. So I might introduce party A to party B, and they would always call me back and say, thank you very much for introducing me to so-and-so. And that just kind of snowballed because people kept calling me and calling me and calling me. So these are 2 teammates from Mercedes. This is the greatest F1 driver in history. This is Lewis Hamilton. This is Valtteri Bottas, who is a very good driver. He's a Finn, and he normally comes in second place to Lewis Hamilton. Okay? But they have to rely on each other. Valerie sometimes gets sick of finishing second, but he's got to deal with it because Lewis is so great. So that slide is out of place. But anyway, so there were certain rules that I developed for myself. And those rules included if it doesn't fit, resist it. Meaning if there's pushback on linking up people or there's pushback on my relationship with that person, there's something odd there, it doesn't really work, then just don't do it. Pull back from it. Make sure that I share something. Meaning like a pit crew, you have to bring your tire or the drill or whatever you're supposed to do to work on the car. But I always wanted to make sure I shared something like in terms of knowledge or information or expertise or just something funny, even a bad joke or something along those lines. Support the team. So by that I mean support the effort of connecting with people and making those connections. Drive connections that are mutually beneficial to both people and hopefully to yourself, but that's kind of secondary. A light touch. So for me, what I would do is I used to read like 5 or 6 newspapers a day and 2 magazines or something like that. Now I read a lot of websites, and what I'll do is I'll just take a little article and I'll send it to somebody and I'll say, hey, I thought you might be interested in this article. Now that tells people that you're thinking about them. It also tells people like, oh, he cares enough to think of me for a particular article or something like that. And people tend to appreciate it, and you're able to continue that relationship even if you, let's say, are so busy that you can't, although you may want to, spend having a lunch appointment with them. And then bring something with you. That's along the same themes of make sure that you're contributing something to the relationship and it's not just one-sided. So you knew I was going to show a slide like this, right? Lewis Hamilton finishing first. And so I think that this is a winning strategy, and it is, that's another picture of Lewis Hamilton winning. But I've had some really great, I would say, wins or victories from this. So one of them is I introduced 2 people that I thought that I was just connecting for business purposes. It turns out that later on they got married, so I considered that a pretty big win. And they have grandchildren now, so it's really, they never named any of their kids Eric, though, to my a couple of companies merged through some things that I was able to do. People who did not know one another, I introduced them. I've gotten people jobs, and that's, I think probably everybody in here has done something like that. And then on a presidential level, this year, there were 2 presidential campaigns who were arguing over an article which appeared in the national media. And the 2 candidates were privately hated one another, right? Or I don't know if hate, that's too strong. But my son would say they were having beef. And so these two people were having beef. So I received a call from one of the candidates, and this person said, "Can you believe what so-and-so did? They're the biggest goofball in the world." And so I said, "Yes, I can't believe they did that. I completely agree with you." And then probably about 2 hours later, I received a call from another presidential candidate, and they said the exact same thing about the other person. And I said, "Yes, I completely agree with you. But you guys should talk, right? There should be a way for you to settle this difference." And I'm sure what was reported in the newspaper was an error. And me sitting here in Cincinnati, Ohio, I set up a meeting for not the two candidates, but their chiefs of staff to meet in Washington, D.C. and settle their differences and work it out. And so that's an example of how this type of, or this strategy or whatever, has proven to be a good part of my life, and I've met a lot of great people doing it. So that's the presentation. Thank you. That was 10 minutes, right?